Ancient humans absolutely noticed who was more or less attractive. And the evidence for that is a lot older than you'd expect. We're talking tens of thousands of years before mirrors, before beauty magazines, before anyone had a word for ugly. But what happened to that person 50,000 years ago is almost nothing like what happens to that person now. And the gap between those two realities tells you a lot more about the world you're living in than it does about anyone's face. Let's start with the obvious question. Did ancient humans even think in terms of attractive and unattractive at all? The answer is yes, and the evidence for that is older than you'd think. Researchers studying facial preferences across completely unconnected cultures, places with no shared history, no shared media, nothing, keep finding the same features showing up as attractive. Symmetry, clear skin, certain proportions in the face. This isn't a trend that started with magazines or movies. It's something your brain was already doing tens of thousands of years before either of those existed, because a symmetrical, healthy-looking face was basically a walking advertisement for good genes and a strong immune system. So if you'd been born 50,000 years ago with features the group considered less attractive, people probably did notice. That part of the story checks out. But here's where it stops looking like the modern version. Picture a typical hunter-gatherer band. Anthropologists studying these groups put the size at roughly 20 to 50 people. That's your entire world. Every person you'll ever know, every potential partner, every rival, every friend. All 20 to 50 of them. Compare that to a dating app pulling from a population of millions, where you're one face in an infinite scroll being judged in half a second by total strangers who will never learn a single other thing about you. In a group of 50, least attractive person in the tribe is a much smaller deal than it sounds like, because everyone already knows everything else about you. They know if you can track an animal for 2 days without losing the trail. They know if you share food when you find it. They know if you're someone who shows up when there's work to do or someone who disappears. In a group that size, your reputation isn't a profile. It's the only thing anyone actually has on you, and it gets built every single day. And here's something that makes the whole idea of the ugly one even shakier. What counted as attractive wasn't fixed. Even just looking at recorded history, the target moves constantly. In ancient Egypt, the standard was symmetry, slender figures, large eyes accentuated with kohl. In parts of West Africa, scarification was the mark of beauty. Deliberately marked skin as a sign of strength and resilience. The Maya practiced head shaping on infants to create an elongated skull, and considered crossed eyes attractive enough that parents would dangle objects in front of babies to encourage it. Han Dynasty China favored a completely different look from Renaissance Europe, which favored a completely different look from ancient Greece, where notably, men were held to a higher physical standard than women. So even attractive wasn't one fixed target you either hit or missed. It was a constantly shifting set of local preferences, which means the least attractive person in one tribe could easily have been considered strikingly good-looking in the tribe 2 valleys over. The bar wasn't just lower stakes. It was a different bar entirely depending on where you happened to be born. Now here's something most people have never even considered. Looking different in an ancient tribe wasn't only about who was conventionally good-looking. A huge number of people were walking around with permanent, visible changes to their faces and bodies from injuries, and the archaeological record shows, again and again, that this didn't get you cast out. The clearest example is a Neanderthal known as Shanidar 1, discovered in Shanidar Cave in northern Iraq and studied since the 1950s. This man lived around 60,000 years ago, and his skeleton tells a brutal story. A withered, mostly useless arm, significant hearing loss, and a series of old fractures that had healed over years. Researchers who examined his bones concluded that injuries like his would have made him heavily dependent on other people for basic survival. And yet, he lived for years, possibly decades, after these injuries occurred. Someone fed him. Someone helped him move. Nobody looked at a man who could no longer hunt, who likely looked and moved very differently than he used to, and decided he was now more trouble than he was worth. And he's not an isolated case. At a site in Sweden called Canal Jordan, archaeologists found a skull with a healed head wound, a serious injury that had scarred over on a person who clearly survived it. Researchers studying these kinds of finds describe a pattern that shows up across multiple sites and time periods. People with old, healed trauma to the head and face, trauma that would have visibly changed how they looked, living long enough afterward for that healing to fully take place. Healing takes time. Time means somebody was looking after you while you healed, scarred face and all, and then life just continued. So here's the full picture. Tens of thousands of years ago, ancient humans already had brains wired to notice symmetry, skin, proportion, the same basic ingredients we still respond to now. At the same time, what counted as attractive was never fixed. It shifted from group to group and era to era. And in small groups where everyone's survival depended on everyone else, looks were one data point buried under dozens of others that actually mattered more. Being ugly was never that deep. Even people who were visibly, permanently different, through injury, through whatever the group considered unattractive, weren't just discarded. The bones show people being kept alive, fed, and cared for, looking however they looked, for years. Were people teased? Almost certainly. Humans have probably been making fun of each other's faces since before we had words sharp enough to really land. That's not new, but being occasionally roasted by people who've known you your whole life, and being erased from the group because of your face, those are not the same thing, and only one of them has any real evidence behind it. The pressure to be conventionally attractive didn't disappear as societies got bigger. If anything, it got worse, because the bigger the group, the less anyone actually knows about you beyond what they can see in a glance. The ugliest person in an ancient tribe was still someone's best tracker, or best storyteller, or the person who knew exactly which plants wouldn't kill you. Being ugly and having all those skills was like being rich, or having fame, or status, in today's world. Their face was one thing about them. It was never the whole story.